If you're a NASCAR fan, then you've probably received this birthday card from a relative at some point. It's a cringy and overused joke, but to be fair, we NASCAR fans do love a NAS-looking car. We keep watching for the unfolding storylines and high-speed action, but the race cars out there on the track are undeniably the face of the sport, and the thing that gets most people to flip the channel over and watch their first race. NASCAR has had some odd-looking cars fill out its ranks from time to time, but on the whole, most of the cars that come down the pipe look amazing. They're sleek, stylish, mean-looking, and go fast. And since NASCAR is a stock car series, for most of its history you could watch a car win on Sunday and then turn around and buy that exact same car from the dealership on Monday. You might actually be able to argue that the entire sport of NASCAR itself is just an elaborate marketing scheme. But that then begs the question, of all the hundreds of models that have competed in NASCAR's highest division, which were the best looking? My criteria for making this list is pretty simple. So long as a car made at least one start in the top division, it's up for consideration. But beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so this is all just my opinion. Your list is probably wildly different. So with all that out of the way, let's get into it. Number 10, the 2005 through 2006 Dodge Charger. Okay, this one might be a bit controversial and people then and now are pretty split on it, but I gotta say, I love this thing. Let's start with the elephant in the room, the nose. Dodges at the time always had this rectangular grille opening with a cross in the center, and when Dodge switched from the Intrepid to the new Charger, they made the new snout very pronounced. It looked a little goofy, but it stuck out from the crowd, and its geometry made it wicked fast in the wind. Casey Kane and Rocket Ryan Newman put the entire division on blast with these things when qualifying day came around. They were so stupidly fast that it almost always seemed like it was a foregone conclusion that the front row on Sunday would be some combo of Alltel Blue and Dodge Dealers Red. The only question was what order the two would be in. At a time when Chevys and Fords were looking more and more identical, here comes Dodge with a big departure, which is pretty on brand for them, to be honest. Love it or hate it, you've got to admit, that thing was memorable. Number 9, the 1996 and 1997 Ford Thunderbird. Ford has always had a penchant for horsepower, fielding the most powerful power plants the sport has ever seen. On top of that, their aero department was top-notch, and the 1-2 combo of bad fast motors and sleek bodies came to fruition in 1996, when they unveiled their newly revamped Thunderbird. This T-Bird featured a distinctive sideways D-shaped grille opening and aggressive lines around the nose that were designed to move the air out of the way so it could cut through the wind like nothing else. The thing sat so low to the ground that it looked like a shark getting ready to strike. Long gone were the days of the boxy bird in the 1980s. Dale Jarrett, Jeff Burton, Rusty Wallace, and many others put the new bird in victory lane often. But it was Mark Martin in 1997 who showed what it could really do, running the fastest race ever at Talladega that year with an average race speed of 188 miles an hour. That's completing 500 miles in just a little more than 2.5 hours. That is blisteringly fast. That's a major feather in its cap, but just for full disclosure, I might be a bit biased here in placing it on the list, because my very first car was a 1996 Thunderbird LX. Unfortunately, Ford nixed the bird and opted for the Taurus for the 1998 season, which looked hideous but actually improved on the Thunderbird's aerodynamics, meaning that we'd never see the T-Bird fly ever again. Number 8, the 1996 through 2002 Pontiac Grand Prix. This model of Grand Prix stuck around for a long while, and looking at its results, you can see why. After the boxy 95 Grand Prix failed to win over fans or races for that matter, Pontiac redrew their flagship car from scratch and rolled out a banger with this masterpiece. It changed a little bit over the years, but the main lines remained mostly the same for 6 years. Like the Thunderbird previously on this list, the Grand Prix sat low to the ground and looked mean as hell. But it got better results and served for longer, so it gets a leg up over my beloved bird. The car was way ahead of its time too. I mean, hell, look at it. It looks like a late model stock from today, with its squat design and flat squared off deck lid. Ward Burton and Tony Stewart made this car a common fixture in victory lane, but it was Bobby Labonte who got the most out of it for sure. He won Pontiac its first title in 11 years in 2000 with an absolutely crushing points victory, and Stewart followed him up with another one in 2002. However, Joe Gibbs Racing would inexplicably switch over to the Monte Carlo for 2003. And even more perplexing, Pontiac would change the Grand Prix drastically for the 2003 season, and then dip out of NASCAR for good. The new GP was pretty good on the track and it looked fine, but the older model got better aero numbers. And since Pontiac pretty much had one foot out the door, many Pontiac teams opted to roll into Speed Weeks in 2003 sporting the older model. It went out of the sport suddenly, but it was still whooping newer cars all the way until its dying day. Number 7, the 1951 Hudson Hornet. Having the actual manufacturers supporting teams and giving them equipment and technical advice is commonplace now, and has been forever it seems like. But the first company to actually do so was Hudson in 1951, when they unveiled the fabulous Hornet. Legendary car owner and crew chief Bud Moore said that when you stepped into other cars it felt like you were climbing up into them. But with the Hornet, he said it felt like you were stepping down, and that was the Hornet's biggest advantage, its super low center of gravity. Back then, cars were bulky and aimed for comfortable rides for families to shuttle themselves to church in. Thus, they had a tendency to sit high above the frame and roll into the turns, but the Hornet could carry a family of 4 and stay planted into the ground like it was a slot car. Combine that with its sleek aerodynamic body and it could rip around Darlington with the best of them. The thing was totally unique looking, revolutionary in every sense of the word, and absolutely crushed the competition, winning the Manufacturers' Championship every year straight from 1951 to 1954. When the Pixar movie Cars needed a character to portray an aging legend, they picked none other than Doc Hudson for that role, and for darn good reason. Number 6, the 1988 Buick Regal. Short-lived but long beloved, the 88 Buick Regal was a classy and mean-looking vehicle. Regals had always looked great with their late 70s and early 80s iterations, but after Buick went to the hideous LeSabre in 1986, they lost a lot of interest from fans and their performance dropped. But in 88 they brought back the Regal and it was a total smoke show. With its aggressive front end and sleek hood and deck lid, it cut through the air with ruthless efficiency, and won in its very first start at the Daytona 500 that year. If you know anything about Buick's stint in NASCAR, then you have definitely seen that gold Miller High Life number 12 ripping around Daytona Beach. Unfortunately, not many teams had toughed it out with Buick through the LeSabre years, and then they redesigned the Buick for 1989. It took away its flared nose and made it look like a smushed-in pug's face. No wonder they bowed out at the conclusion of the 91 season. They just couldn't take the embarrassment anymore. Should have stuck with what worked, guys. Number 5, the 1971 Dodge Charger and Plymouth Roadrunner. These two cars are essentially the same but with slight alterations to the shape of the side windows, but man, look at the way they squat down in front and rear up in the back. They look like a dog ready for the hunt. And these things lit up the charts too. These two kicked off the muscle car era of NASCAR in the 70s, and after they dominated, every car during this decade looked big and beefy. Even Bobby Allison, who normally fielded a Chevy, jumped over to Mopar for a few years, as the King and Bobby Isaac won everything in sight. After the Wing Daytona and Superbird blew up the rules for NASCAR in 1970, NASCAR implemented new rules that effectively outlawed them, but Chrysler Corp fired back with these two beauties. The whole body acted as a gigantic air wedge and created a stupid amount of downforce that planted the car into the corners, and air dams up front kept the front tires stuck to the asphalt. It wasn't just a head-turner on the road, it was an innovative masterpiece, and is more than deserving of its place on this list. Number 4, the 1957 Chevy Bel Air. The 1950s saw a lot of stylish, crazy-looking bodies get fielded, but one thing that immediately gives a 50s car away are the tail fins, and tail fins never look better than on a 57 Bel Air. This car became an icon of early NASCAR and American car culture, to the point that everyone tried to copy it to some extent. The Bel Air added on to an already winning pedigree and won over a slew of fans and races alike. It was as good on the paved high banks as it was on the sands of Daytona Beach or the dirt of the Carolinas. Anywhere you took this thing, it was bad fast, and it never looked better than when it was decked out in the glossy black paint that Buck Baker had put on it. Nicknamed Black Widow, he wheeled his number 87 Black Behemoth to 10 wins on the year and nabbed the cup at season's end. Others like Fireball Roberts and Paul Goldsmith made the Bel Air a household name with their heroics on Sunday, and made it sell like hotcakes come Monday. Number 3, the 1949 Oldsmobile Delta 88. Yeah, probably didn't expect to see an Oldsmobile on this list, but here we are. In the very first year of NASCAR Cup Series competition, Oldsmobile had an absolute heater waiting in the wings, the Delta 88 Coupe. With swelled wheel wells and a sleek cabin, this thing looked years ahead of its time. And to think, Oldsmobile made this for the road. They had no intention of racing this thing, but nevertheless it absolutely crushed the competition, winning 5 of 8 races in the Cup Series' first season. Even going into 1950 with a new model out, the 49 Delta 88 was still racking up top 5s, often finishing runner-up right behind the newer one. The 1950 model was a little more sleek and slim, but the bulbous aggressive wheel wells of the 1949 model really speak to my inner NASCAR modified fan. A winning record, lines that were miles ahead of the competition, and looks that could kill. What is there not to love about this ageless legend? And fun fact, this Delta 88 piloted by Buck Baker in 1949 is the oldest known completely original NASCAR stock car in existence. It has been painstakingly preserved since its winning days over 70 years ago. Number 2, the 1986 through 1989 Chevy Monte Carlo SS. The 1980s were a learning experience for everyone. New rules dictated a shorter wheelbase for cars to more closely resemble cars out on the street, and the bodies pretty much had to be one-for-one copies of showroom-ready cars. Chevy dropped the ball pretty hard with their 1981 Monte Carlo and Malibu bodies, but in 1983, they put out the Monte Carlo SS, with a new and improved nose, but the rear cabin still caused an awful amount of turbulence that upset the car's aero. So in 1986, they perfected an already great-looking car. The bubble rear window fixed all of the car's aerodynamic woes and made it look as slick as a bullet. Chevy actually manufactured the bare minimum number of 86 SS's necessary for the road to make NASCAR happy, and proved that this was in fact a stock car. But finding a real one of these in the wild on public roads is rarer than finding a unicorn. But holy cow, this thing was an icon. Dale Earnhardt had two of the most dominating seasons in his career wheeling this thing in 1986 and 87, and Darrell Waltrip nabbed his first Daytona 500 in 1989 piloting one. Whoever seemed to be at the helm, the 1986 Monte SS was always a winner, and it looked damn good while doing it. And even to this day at your local short track, there are street stock drivers trying to emulate the look of the Monte Carlo SS. The fandom for this car runs deep. And finally, number 1, the 1978 through 1980 Oldsmobile 442 Cutlass Supreme. Oh yeah, Oldsmobile didn't just make one of the best looking cars of all time, they made the best looking car of all time if you ask me. The 1978 through 1980 Oldsmobile 442 Cutlass Supreme is the quintessential NASCAR stock car. It sits low, has a long and wide body, and its sloped front end and swept back rear cabin made it an aerodynamic monster back in the day. Everyone ran one of these if they wanted to win on the big tracks. At the 1979 Daytona 500, 21 of the 41 starters were piloting an Olds Cutlass. And surprise, surprise, an Olds won, driven by none other than the king himself, who went on to win the championship that year. In 1980, it won the 500 again, this time with Buddy Baker, son of Buck Baker at the helm. The Bakers just love Oldsmobiles, and who could blame them, really? Kel Yarborough, Richard Petty, and Dale Earnhardt won the championship in 1978, 79, and 1980, all while running a mix of Olds and Chevys. And while the late 70s Monte Carlos hold a special place in my heart, nothing beats the slick lines from the Cutlass of that era. If I had to pick between the two as a street car, there's no question. It's Cutlass all the way for me. So there it is, my list of the top 10 best looking stock cars to ever grace the top echelons of NASCAR with their presence. Agree? Disagree? Tell me what you think. I'm always willing to look at some NASCARs. Anyway, I'm Slapshoes, thanks for watching, and until next time, y'all take it easy.